The trunk. You know, you try to do something good for your family. Something to make them proud of you. Feel useful, you know? And then, well, I'll start from the beginning. 17-year-old kid with a driver's license. That was me. I felt I was a good driver. I hadn't hit anyone or anything yet. Seemed to have a knack for staying in the right lane most of the time. My mom was always telling me to stop drifting into other lanes, which naturally got a teenage eyeball roll for a reaction. If a little drifting was the worst thing I was doing, then what could possibly go wrong? Well, I'll tell you what went wrong. It was the night of my grandparents' dinner party. After 15 years of marriage, 7 children, 23 grandchildren, and 1 great-grandchild, they decided they needed another party to celebrate their union. My parents told me they wanted to have some wine, as it was a party, and they didn't usually get to have nights out since my little sister was born a few years ago. Now, my sister was a happy and lovely little accident, but she was at the childhood phase where she had imaginary friends and an attitude problem. She needed 2 of everything and wouldn't be told her imaginary friends weren't real. My parents so desperately needed a night out. I told them I'd be happy to drive. Why? Because I enjoyed driving. More than that, though, I love my family, and I wanted to help. Even more than that, I figured if I drove well, my parents would allow me to borrow the car for a movie theater date next Friday night. So there I was, ready to go to the party. It was a potluck. My parents were bringing pierogies, so they had a giant casserole dish I threw in the trunk with a few boxes we were taking to the thrift shop later that week. Now, my father always added way too much garlic, so I know the pierogies were gonna stink up the trunk, and we would be real douchebags if we gave the boxes to Goodwill smelling like garlic. Trying to do the right thing, I kept the trunk lid open till we left, just so the garlic stink wouldn't be too overwhelming. Previously, my father added so much garlic. Inside the house, my sister was starting to throw a little fit, and was insisting her imaginary friend needed a booster seat just like hers. My parents needed some help, so I went inside, and the 3 of us were able to calm her down, buckle her up, and get the drive going. It only took about 30 minutes. So there we were, going to my grandparents' house. Now don't get me wrong, my grandparents were wonderful people, but they really needed to change their neighborhood. From the time I was young, it gave me the creeps, even more than the crime-ridden areas of the city. Like, if you go to those areas, you'll get stabbed. If you go to my grandparents' neighborhood, it looks like some kind of place where fairies steal children. My older cousins joked that the house on the corner of the street was the same house Hansel and Gretel nearly got eaten in. When I pulled into my grandparents' home, involuntary shivers ran throughout my body. More than anything, I just wanted to get inside a well-lit room. Even if that well-lit room was inside a house that eerily had fairy lights intertwined with thick ivy from base to roof. Who was I kidding? My grandparents fit in right here. I helped bring my little sister into the party, and immediately we were both swept away by distant family members asking about the usual questions. When I was gonna graduate high school, and if I was dating anyone. I thought I was doing well, with that driving here, politely answering the same question 20 times, watching my little sister. But there I was, an hour into the party, with my father over my shoulder, asking where the pierogies were. Why would I know? I had driven and been watching over my sister all night. Couldn't one of my parents have brought the crockpot in? Apparently not. So I went out, and let me tell you, it was very dark and a bit unnerving. Seriously, had this neighborhood never heard of streetlights? I opened the trunk and reached in to grab the crockpot. At the time, I thought it must have been my imagination, but it felt like my hand touched something leathery. Pulled my hand back. What was it? It was too dark to see anything. Where was the trunk light when you needed it? Pulled out my cell phone and turned on the flashlight. When I pointed it inside the trunk, I could see some of the boxes, a bag, the crockpot. Was that? It was an eye. For several moments, the eyeball and I stared at each other. It examining me just trying to rationalize what was happening. Maybe it was a Halloween decoration. Maybe it was a doll. But the way the eye slightly gyrated up and down made me think either it was mechanical or it was alive. Finally, I slammed the trunk closed and ran back into the party. "There's something in the trunk!" Everyone turned to look at me, the grandchild who was causing a scene. Everyone gathered around me, wanting to know more. At mention of the trunk, we all, literally the entire party, paraded out to the trunk. I was just expecting my parents to come out. Never before was I so humiliated. Everyone seemed to take a turn pulling a single box out, looking inside, putting it back in the trunk, and then moseying over to me so they could let me know it must have been my imagination. Now don't get me wrong, I was more than willing to accept it was just my imagination. Honestly, what was the alternative? Just as we were all about to turn away, a neighbor came out of their house and walked towards all of us, which she shared. She told us that just after I left, someone used the child security lock inside the trunk and opened it. Someone roughly 3 feet tall, wearing black clothes with long black hair, ran away and shut the trunk after them. When the police came, I was a little annoyed that they didn't listen to me until the neighbor validated my story, and I was just plain angry and scared. The police took me in and asked me about what I saw. I told them exactly what I had been sharing all evening. After every time, I had to retell what happened. The regret from opening my mouth in the first place grew stronger. Now the authorities suspected I was a child abductor, as it sounded like a child left the trunk. So humiliating. So frustrating. But all the emotions I felt had little to do with what went on in the trunk, and more to do with what came after. After that party, I suddenly couldn't help but notice my sister more, roughly 3 feet tall, her toy teacups and bears, how she always insisted on 2 of everything, so her imaginary friend could have 1. And I couldn't help but notice the way my parents turned a blind eye to all of this. Suddenly, their insistence the imaginary friend wasn't real seemed hollow. And when they looked at me to confirm it, it was less of a call of support, and more of a call to play along. I did, honestly. The thought of knowing the truth made me sick. As if they were rewarding me for my silence, my parents told me I could take the car to my movie date. But it was okay. I'd take the bus.